this is the Business of Drinks podcast. I'm Susanne Currid. In the past decade, we've seen an explosion in the brewing industry here in London, with much of that growth coming from breweries who describe themselves as craft, artisan or progressive. To give an illustration of this rapid growth, I have figures here from management today that say that the number of breweries in London increased by 24% in 2015, with over 36 new openings. However, is this rapid growth sustainable for the longer term? There are many voices in the industry who are saying we've reached a state of peak craft beer, where there's not much room left for newcomers, and many of the small independents could potentially find it harder going, especially in a post-Brexit era. Today, we're in Shoreditch in East London to explore the current state of play in the independent London brewing sector and to forecast where the challenges and opportunities will arise for these brewers in the near to longer term. I'm joined by Csaba Babak, author of Beer Means Business, a new book which provides a detailed overview of the independent UK brewing industry, and David Martin, my colleague here at the Business of Drinks. I'm also delighted to welcome along Sofia De Crescentiis from Redchurch Brewery, a London craft brewer who hit the headlines recently after they raised nearly £500,000 through a crowdfunding campaign. Welcome everybody.
Hello.
So I'm going to start with you, Sofia. I'm going to offer our key question to you. Do you think we've reached peak craft beer yet, especially here in London?
Now, I think I already have the answer to the question, but I wouldn't mind if you could expand on what you mean by peak craft beer, as in, have we seen all the styles that are going to come out, the number of breweries that are going to come out, the expansion for the breweries who have come out in sort of the craft beer boom? Like, what do you mean by peak craft beer exactly?
I think in the context of what I'm talking about here, we're looking at have craft beer sales peaked in London? Are we going to see no more breweries opening? Is the market as big as it can be at this point? Is there room for more newcomers?
Well, I would say that we definitely haven't reached peak of demand yet. I mean, I don't know anyone who tries a well-made beer, such as a craft beer, if you want to call it that, and then decides to go back to something that tastes of absolutely nothing at all. It's sort of a one-way street. Once you try something that's worth drinking, you don't really go back. So in that sense, absolutely not. The demand is only going to increase. I do think for new brewers coming on board, it's a lot more difficult. There are a lot of experienced brewers. For example, Redchurch Brewery, we've been around for 5 years now. We've had 5 years to sort of hone in our recipes. We're already expanding, and even that we're sort of behind a couple of other breweries who have done so in the past few years. So it's a lot more challenging to come in to a scene that has, I don't even know how many breweries are in London now, close to 90. It's going to be a lot harder to sort of break in there and make a name for yourself. I think anyone who sort of joins now as a new brewery has to really have a strong vision of what sets them apart from other breweries. You can't really get away with just making good beer anymore because so many breweries do that so well, and on top of that have experience doing it, have a sales team who are out talking to bars and customers about that product. So it's a lot more competitive, but there's absolutely no way that we've hit the craft beer pinnacle or the peak of craft beer just yet.
Okay, thanks Sophia. Perhaps Csaba, you could add your thoughts on the peak beer scenario.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, Susanne. As you mentioned in the introduction, I think there are two layers to a peak. One suggests that there are barriers to start operation in the market for newcomers. The other aspect can mean limitations for existing players, either in staying in the market or in terms of growth. I think both layers are very hard to judge by the absolute numbers alone. I think the question is really relative. There are plenty of potential limitations you can take into consideration, be it workforce, materials, infrastructure or capital. But most of them, I think, can be addressed or accommodated with a new strategy with creative solutions, except for one. In my view, all the interpretations of peak lead to one primary challenge, and that's basically access to consumer. Even if there is demand, you have to make a product available and sell to consumers, and that needs space. In London there is a lot of beer being sold, and the market is huge in terms of volume. It might as well be a marketplace for many more players of significant size. The reality is, though, that most of the market is supplied by a limited number of players. Their products are everywhere. They dominate retail and therefore leave very little space for products by small producers. This is why I believe that the challenge for small producers really is gaining space in retail, securing points of sale, be it a pump, be it a tap, be it just shelf space, whatever fits your product profile most. In my view, there needs to be further integration between producers and the trade, not necessarily in financial terms or formally, organization-wise, but more in terms of closer cooperation and campaigning. Because a paradigm shift is still ahead of us, which is essential for small producers, and that's basically thinking about retail in a different way. The presence of a product should not be justified by demand alone. Now, the presence of the product should actually drive sale and build a brand and build demand as well. And this is why I believe that there needs to be closer cooperation between producers and trade. And this is closely linked also to the principle of exposure and also trial. In other words, the first initial stages of the consumer journey with the product. And I wrote about this topic in more detail in Beer Means Business. I hope and I believe that small producers will step up to this challenge and succeed in cooperation with each other and with trade to seize the opportunity that is currently presented by the gradual dissolution of the tight system. In my view, this represents a more viable alternative to opening and investing in new venues and outlets.
So, David, what are your thoughts on the peak craft beer scenario?
I think Sophia hit the nail on the head, which is that if you are a new brewer coming into the marketplace, then I think you have to do something different. The market now is much more structured, much more sophisticated than 3 or 4 years ago. And unless you can actually produce a different beer, a different experience, or do something different for the outlets, you're going to find it very difficult to compete. But I think the space is there. London market will increase and increase. I think the distribution is capable of taking 2 or 3 times the current volume, which actually fits with the plans most of the big brewers have of doubling or tripling production. So I think the opportunity is there. You've just got to make sure you do it correctly to get your share of it.
David, where do you think smaller independents can outperform the major drinks companies and the larger craft beer operators?
Well, I think it's the usual set of requirements. You've got to be nimble, you've got to react to the marketplace and the trends faster than the larger ones can. You've got to keep producing new products, you've got to give a better customer service to the niche that you operate in. So it's the usual thing, all small manufacturers, small companies just have to be faster, quicker, more nimble on their feet. But don't sell on price. That's the route to disaster.
So I'm going to come back to you, Sophia. How much do you think that customer demand, especially the demands of the millennial market, will drive the industry forward? Will there be a trend for customers to seek out ever more unique drinking experiences, or is this a passing fad?
It's definitely not a passing fad. I mean, Well, the millennial market as well is really important to keep in mind because it is the market going forward. Someone who's 20 years old now and a student who can't afford to necessarily drink a good beer that they want to drink will in 5 years' time have an income that they are able to dispose on something like that. And from there on out, I don't see the generation after that sort of backtracking at all. I think going forward, we're all looking for a little more provenance. We have so much more information. We can very easily find out where our food and drink comes from, and no one wants something that's subpar. We're all sort of happy to pay a premium to get something better. I guess that's me speaking from a very tiny submersive bubble where we all is my friends and I, but I do see that sort of coming across the whole millennial generation in London at least, where everyone must have a bit of disposable income in order to live here.
Okay, David, perhaps I could take that question from you, a more senior perspective.
Thank you, Suzanne. No, I think the London market is a very sophisticated market. It's a very sort of growing market interested in quality, in taste, in experience. And it will deliver those. If you deliver those elements to the marketplace, it will take them, buy them, and keep coming back for more. And that's the key issue.
Would you say we're all millennials now, really?
I think so, yes.
I would add that, surprisingly enough, consumers seem to be as experimental as producers themselves. And I think this will bring some very exciting products. Nevertheless, as David mentioned earlier, it will be very hard to distinguish your products, and it will be very hard to navigate the market, and probably consumers will need more of a story, more extreme visual or narrative communication and so on. Otherwise people will get lost and probably a bit overwhelmed with choice and variety.
I mean, I've talked to a lot of brewers. I work with brewers and cider makers, and they'll say at the other end of the scale, when they're talking to the on-trade, they're just interested about how much profit they're going to make from a drink, and they're a lot less interested about the story and about all of these values that we're promoting here. So have you any perspective on how that challenge can be overcome for small drinks businesses who are trying to sell something which is a bit more premium? Sophia, perhaps you've got some insights.
I do. I can't tell you how many annoying conversations I have about GP and how many times I try to explain to bartenders and bar managers and business owners that this is a really antiquated way to look at things. If you're making £3 off of a pint from Redchurch Brewery versus £3 off of a pint from some conglomerate that I don't want to name, then what's the difference of the GP? You're still making your standard amount of money, you're still going to be bringing in more revenue and the same amount of cash margin. I don't understand why we're so jammed into this GP percentage way of thinking. It's really time to let go of that. Let the customer tell you what the customer wants and just sort of start a new way of running bars and restaurants. So this is a conversation that I have all the time as I'm actually in sales. So I'll always be speaking to someone who says, well, in order to get my GP, I need to sell your pint at £7. And I'm like, yeah, but if you do that, then you're making an extra, £1.50 per pint as compared to another brand. Why don't you just skew the GP percentages and make the same cash margin? What's the difference? And apparently it's a very big difference because then accountants get upset. But again, I just think it's a very, very antiquated way of running the business.
And I think it's very short term as well, because what you're trying to do is give your customers an experience, give them a great product. But at the end of the day, that gets the customer to come back time and time again. And if you continue educating them, if you continue giving them different drinks, different tastes, they'll keep coming back. And that's worth much more than casually making a small amount of percentage margin and then losing that customer because you've just sold him any old beer and made your money.
So would you agree, Csaba, it's all about education?
I'm very glad to hear the comments from both Sophia and David. I believe, especially in light of these insights, the challenge is even greater. Unfortunately, short-term thinking will probably not disappear from on-trade in the short run. Nevertheless, as David also mentioned, demand is built through on-trade, and listing artisanal or experimental beers on trade is crucial and probably pay off only in the long run. Nevertheless, this is in the interest of both on-trade and producers, but it is very hard to overcome the objections.
It's sort of coming back to your earlier comment about on-trade and the brewers need to be more sort of working in collaboration and partnership and realising if they both serve the needs of the customer, ultimately they're both going to gain, and that can take a bit more long-term thinking rather than looking at the short-term sales bottom line.
No, exactly. I agree, and there's probably another element which is more like quality control or assurance, and probably this is why many breweries consider opening tap rooms, because this is an obvious choice to secure at least one point of sale at the right customer service, with the right customer service at the right quality. And unfortunately, this is also something that needs not only investment but sort of more attention and probably more working with the product in on trade, which obviously increases the cost of servicing it.
Okay, thank you. That was a very illuminating conversation. And what about the drive for a healthier lifestyle? Will we start drinking less beer, or is that something brewers should factor into their product range with lower ABVs? Csaba, I believe you've got some thoughts on that particular topic.
I'm of the opinion that producers will need to think in long term, and this will affect the portfolio they are considering. We are supposed to lead healthier lifestyles because it is the reasonable thing to do, and we are constantly being educated about how it is done and what the benefits are. On the other hand though, healthier choices are also being made relatively easier. As far as alcohol is concerned, drinking is unlikely to become cheaper. That's reality. Drinks are unlikely to become more universally available or more easily available. And that's simply because there are serious public health concerns associated to alcohol consumption. And while the acceptable level and pattern of alcohol consumption is being debated, there is a so-called harmful consumption which is being tackled with tighter generic regulation and also reduction of overall consumption. And that affects all categories in the alcohol industry, unfortunately. There are specific means to address certain categories or drinks in a differentiated manner. And fortunately enough, the taxation system is formed in a way to benefit beer with lower alcohol content, up to 2.8%, which makes these low alcohol beers a slightly policy safer option in the long term. Simply because they will be relatively more appealing for consumers when they judge value for money, alcohol for price. There are other potential measures though that can stimulate product diversification. Let's just use nutrition information as an example. Mandatory nutrition information might affect consumption patterns, and we might see businesses respond to that in terms of product composition or even just serving sizes.
I just think that the craft beer consumer is a more conscious consumer in every which way. You know, we're probably more likely to have a half pint of something that we enjoy and spend a little bit more money on it and know that the ABV is a bit higher than slamming 3 pints of a really bland lager, just because that's the most efficient way to get drunk, or that's the most bang for your buck, that kind of thing. So in line with that sort of consciousness, I think a lot of younger drinkers or craft beer drinkers are more conscious of their bodies as well and their general health. You know, they won't necessarily be slamming IPAs every day. It might just be a treat.
Okay.
And I think also the other point is that I think craft breweries tend to make better quality beer. So they use better ingredients, and altogether it's a healthier product than sort of some chemically produced, mass-produced product.
Well, certainly we've seen the numbers in the industry indicate that sales are going up, but that's not necessarily volume going up. It means there's a lower volume, but it's because quality is driving sales now. And
Yes.
I think that can be only a good thing for the customer and for their health going forward. So finally, I'm going to look at the export market. So I'd like to ask you, Sophia, first, how much effort would you think independent brewers should put into the export market? Could it offer a significant growth opportunity for a handful or a wider section of the London brewers market?
I think for a smaller brewery to go into an export market, they need to be really, really careful. If they're at capacity, I really don't think it's a great use of volume to go into an export territory. It should really be used for your home territory to build on a brand and have that sort of that home base and brand love there. I think export as well maybe isn't always treated as an export market. Sort of a lot of breweries will put some beer on a pallet and ship it off and not know where it ends up, not know the people they're working with, not really build a partnership. So it'll be maybe one pallet to one country, another pallet to another country, and then that equals 4 pallets at the end of the month. But what does that really mean in terms of building on your brand? On top of that, it's quite expensive if you actually want to do it properly, if you actually want to go visit your distributor overseas and see where your beer is being served and make sure that you don't have a 3-year-old bottle of IPA on the back shelf of the bar that no one goes to. It's really, really important that you actually do pay attention to your export distribution just as much as you do your domestic distribution. So I would strongly advise that smaller breweries not just ship pallets willy-nilly, but pick a few export markets and really focus on them to build that same brand identity over there and actually see beer pull through more, because then you get, one, a fresher product, and two, you actually get some brand recognition. You're actually building on a whole new market, which is what export should be all about.
Great. And David, do you have any further thoughts on the export market for smaller brewers?
Well, a couple of things. One is that UKTI do excellent training programs on export. And if you're considering export, you should go to a UKTI training seminar, which is free of charge. The other thing is that, as Sophia said, I think you've got to look at it in the long term. It's not a short-term exercise, and you've got to have the time to do it. You've got to have the money and the resource, which means someone who's going to follow up and keep pushing the business, because if you are 500 miles away from where your beer is selling, you need to know what's happening there. That means you need to be in contact. That means you need to follow up regularly. Without those things, it's a waste of time.
So the supposed benefits of the duty break, for example, on exports, maybe they're not enough to potentially go into the export market.
No, I think that the duty breaks will get swallowed up by additional costs very easily. And the danger is to ship and forget. You need to ship, follow up, follow through, repeat, follow through, repeat. And it goes on and on and on. It's not a one-stop, one-hit wonder.
Okay. Csaba, any further thoughts on the export market for smaller brewers?
I will leave it to the experts. I only have to offer my observation, which is there has to be a clear purpose of engaging in export, especially because of the resources required just to do the market research, just to identify how to sell it, what is the unique proposition in that market, and what the competition is, because it's not close to home.
You mentioned a duty break as well. It's not really a duty break. I mean, we don't pay domestic UK duty on beer that's shipped abroad, but that's not to say that your importer doesn't pay their domestic duty. So we may get a break, but really that means that you should be removing what you would be paying to the HMRC and passing that break along to your distributor, because overseas they're going to have to pay duty. The last thing you want is for a beer that no one's ever heard of to land in a market that you've never been in and be charged twice as much for a pint or bottle, because people may not be interested in trying it, and then by the time it gets pulled through, it could be old, and it could actually do damage to your brand. So it's not really a duty break. That duty break is something that should really be passed along to the distributor. They will pay duty in just a different market.
I guess it looks as an attractive thing on paper, but as soon as you start to work it through and the business consequences of actually going into an export market, it clearly doesn't really have quite the value that it was purported to have, I think, when it was brought in by HMRC.
But I think, Sophia's pointed out correctly that it should be seen as another distribution channel, which means it's part of a strategy, it's part of a thought process, it's part of an activity, and it's something that's planned for, structured and followed through, rather than just a one-off wonder, sell a few pallets, isn't that great? I've pocketed a bit of extra money, and the reality is that's done you no favours.
Thank you, everyone. I think we've had a really interesting conversation here today, and for our first podcast here at the Business of Drinks. So I'd like to thank everybody for your insights, and I hope you, the listener, have enjoyed listening to our conversation as much as we have. If you're interested in finding out more, you can hop over to our website at businessofdrinks.co.uk. There you'll find various blog posts and free resources that are designed to help anyone who's building an independent drinks business. It just leaves me to say a final thank you again to all our guests, to Csaba, Sophia and David. Goodbye from us all, and I hope you'll tune in again soon for our next Business of Drinks podcast.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Thank you.